Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are going to kick off the third panel of this first day of the Wellness and the Wellbeing Global Summit. And this panel will be about one very powerful topic, resilience. And the panel is building resilience, helping people navigate the challenges of this very chaotic world. And I am very excited with this conversation. It's one of the topics that we discuss so much about in a lot of the events that we put together with Hacking HR, given the fact that it is indeed a crazy, chaotic world. Things are changing so fast that it has become uh, a necessity for individuals and for organizations to build resilience. So I am very excited about the conversation, and I'm going to be welcoming our panel in a second. But first, I'm going to welcome our moderator, Tisa. I'm welcoming you here. Hello, how are you?
Good morning, Enrique. It's so nice to see you again.
Likewise, thank you. How is everything going?
Fabulous, as always.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. I am excited about the conversation. Thank you so much for moderating. It's such a powerful topic. Uh, the fact that we are seeing so much change in the world, and it's difficult for everybody to cope with. So, building resilience both at the level of the organization and at the level of the individual has truly become some sort of a mandatory challenge for everyone. So very excited with the conversation. Thank you, Tisa, for moderating the panel. I'm going to be welcoming your panels or panelists. Joe, Esayas, I hope I'm saying that right, and Kati. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I am excited about the conversation. If you need me, I'm going to be in the background listening and learning. Tisa, let me know if you need anything from me. In the meantime, for everybody who is watching online, once again, thank you so much for being here. Keep the comments, keep the questions coming, post them in the chat. It's, given how fast the panel is moving, it's not necessarily likely that those questions will be asked to the panelists, but then you get to interact with other people who are participating in this event. And if you have missed some of the two panels that we had before, or if you are going to miss any of the sessions that we have throughout this week, don't worry. We are recording everything, and all this material the videos will be available to you in the Hacking HR Lab by next week. So, having said that, Tisa, turning it over to you, the online stage. Have fun and have a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's so great to meet all of you. Here's what I'd love to do is to maybe turn it over to you for a very brief introduction so that we can dive into the topic. So maybe just 10, 15 seconds. Who are you? Why are you an expert on this topic? And why does this topic interest you? So, Joe, if I do the Brady Bunch, just who's the first person on my right, why don't we start with you? Just tell us who you are.
Happy to go first. Thank you. I'm Joe Pope. I'm the Director of HR Operations at Nixon Peabody, which is a national and international law firm. I have overseen wellness initiatives at many organizations, and especially with this era of remote work and flexible work arrangements. This is a topic that really is at the forefront of everything that we do in HR. So I'm happy to be part of this panel.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Katie?
Hi, happy Monday, everyone. Really, really happy to be here as a part of this exciting and important panel. My name is Kati. I'm leading a talent function at Brighter, leading legal tech software startup based everywhere. No, not really, but it's a remote first company and we operate in about 20 countries, mostly in Europe, South Africa, and Eastern Time of the United States. I'm based in south of Spain, although I'm traveling sometimes to see my colleagues in person, but I'm truly discovering also the joys of and challenges of working asynchronously and remotely. Prior to that, I worked in different talent DEI functions in different technical startups between Spain, Germany, and mostly in global functions. So yeah, I feel like this is a really interesting topic. So I'm looking forward to learning from all of you and also sharing some of my learnings throughout.
Thank you so much. And Asais, last but certainly not least.
Hello, everyone. My name is Asias. I lead inclusion, belonging, and community impact at CSAA Insurance Group, which is a AAA insurer. And I'm calling you from Silver Spring, Maryland, the suburbs of DC. What makes me an expert in this topic? Well, I don't know that I would call myself an expert per se, but I sit with these thoughts and follow those thoughts along throughout my life. I entered this work at the intersection of international development and youth development, and resilience is often really the foundation that the work is done through. And as I find it in diversity and inclusion and in wellness, all of those things are connected, right? Your ability to really create barriers of support is connected to your long-term success of any individual's ability to thrive. And so I enter this conversation from that background and really sitting with those thoughts continuously. And beyond the labor that I do and beyond how often I think about these things, I love chocolate and I love coffee. So that's me, Asias.
I love the chocolate part. So just really quickly, I'm Tissa Richards, and I like to say a recovering tech software founder and CEO, because I might accidentally start another company one day, but I'm trying hard not to. And today I have a company that we do a lot of executive development, diversifying boardrooms and C-suites. I'm here in Austin, Texas, and I have to apologize if it's really loud. We are just about to start a massive thunderstorm, I think. So amazing thunder and lightning happening just outside my window. So yeah, so hopefully we don't lose power. And it's really cool to see the comments actually, because we have people from all over the world, which is in true hacking HR fashion. So I love these. So I want to dive in and I really love to level set on these conversations. You know, if we're talking about resilience, it's really interesting to get a sense from all of you. What is resilience, right? I think sometimes we think we have a common understanding of a term like that, but it would be really great to just hear, what are we talking about in your mind? What does resilience mean? So Joe, what about you?
To me, it's being able to cope with all of the different distractions, challenges, and even goals and expectations that you set for yourself and others set for you. It in this in this current work environment, even more is being asked of people. Even in some cases with fewer and fewer resources, as different functions are competing for funding and different types of technology. So to me, it's being able to overcome those barriers to not only achieve what you're setting out to achieve, but also to do it in a way that doesn't burn yourself out, feels motivating, and helps you feel that you're on a path forward instead of constantly trying to climb that hamster wheel, so to speak.
Yeah, how about you, Kadi?
I really agree with Joe. And preparing for that panel, I gathered a few definitions. There are three of them. So one is what Joe already mentioned. So like the capacity to recover quickly, certain mental toughness, recovery, a really good process of adapting well in the view of changes, adversities, threats, traumas, stress. What I like the most is also the more natural definition of what is resilience, because I was thinking that oftentimes, especially in a tech industry, in a startup industry, we might think about us as machines. Obviously, machines need servicing, needs a good overlook, needs to go to some sort of reparation from time to time. But I don't think humans are like machines. I think we are much more like plants or like animals, like natural phenomena. And they are also recovering. So there is a really nice definition. So the resilience being an ability of a substance or an object to spring back into shape, elasticity, agility. I really think this is my favorite part of resilience. So that's why I like this topic so much.
I love that, Katie. I too think about resilience as the ability to bounce back, and I actually love the example you gave around machines. And I wasn't expecting you to switch it up the way you did because I was following along. Right? You do need repair and resilience. You do need those scheduled maintenance. You need to be able to think about how long do I want this machine to be able to last, even beyond what I'm told that it could last. Right? You can't really do that unless you're going and going, and that you really need to plan those things. And for me, I think about resilience as your ability to bounce back. But oftentimes we think about resilience when there's moments of stress and we're like, oh, I got to be resilient. Well, that's not the time for resilience. Resilience should have been thought a long time ago. And it's really creating those protective measures, those maintenance, those ability to rest, all of those things that get you through, not even get you through, that allows you to thrive, right? Because I don't know about you, but I'm done getting through. I want to thrive. And one of the things that I think about in the context of definition of resilience is how oftentimes we think about resilience in moments of stress, but we also think about resilience as an individual. Like individuals need to be resilient, but we don't always think about how does our culture foster resilience, right? What do we have in place for folks to be able to bounce back in moments of stress, whether it's caused by the organization or in their individual lives? It really doesn't make any difference because it impacts both aspects of our lives.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I notice in our culture, um, having to take a step back sometimes and even just do nothing periodically is can be viewed as a weakness. We like to pride ourselves in constantly going and taking on more and more. So I'm curious, what have what have all of you found to be successful when faced with those kinds of expectations?
So, if I understand, is the ability to bounce back. Can you repeat the question for me, actually, Joe?
So we're saying giving yourself that space, right,
Mhm.
to take a step back when you're starting to feel stressed. If you haven't planned already, in a perfect world, everything would be planned out, right? But sometimes life happens, and we are faced with competing pressures and demands. So I'm curious, what have you found to be useful tools or strategies when you're in the thick of that,
Yeah.
that type of situation?
That's right. I guess on an individual level, when I'm there, one of the questions that I ask myself is, what need isn't being met right now, right? Because clearly something's happening to me. I'm not giving myself what I need if I'm at this point. And so when I ask that question, it allows me to get back into my body and figure out like what is happening. Am I having an emotional reaction to something? Is there a challenge that I'm not able to understand? Whatever it may be, the important thing for that question for me is it allows me to go back to my body, figure out what I need, figure out what's happening. And from there, when I'm ready, I can start to solution. So on an individual level, that's what I do. On an organizational level, if something's happening, I think about what is going on in the organization. Are we bringing things on too fast for people? Like, I just think what is going on in the organization and what could have been done, right? To make sure that we didn't get to this place. Because oftentimes we individualize resiliency, like I said, as an individual action, but rarely do we think about how have we caused this ability or this situation for someone not to be resilient. Because I always assume humans are naturally resilient. It's not a question for me, right? But how are we enabling it? So for me, I don't think on an organizational level, I don't stop there and say, hey, what can we do now? My automatic thinking is to go back and think about what could we have done differently to not get here. But once we're there, creating spaces for people to process what's happening, to verbalize what's happening, to name what's happening for them, I often is really a great space to start when you're already in that moment of clutch, whether you're an individual or solving on the realm of an organization.
Oh, go ahead, Kelly. Or was that me?
No, I just wanted to add to what Isaias mentioned. Something that we as leaders, as people leaders, as managers, have an obligation towards the organizations, the companies we work at. I think we should first of all walk the talk, and if we praise for unhealthy, for recovering, and very agile organization, we should be the first to set a good example. Take time off, prioritize in a good way, sometimes ruthlessly, sometimes having those discussions about what is it that means the most, because we all know that we can work on all of the topics all the time. It will never stop. So we should be the ones who are sharing, how to get the resources for an everyday happening, and how to recognize also when our resources are getting into a depletion phase. So I think that's a big role in nowadays modern leadership, to start with our own life and our own balance and share it with the team.
So you said something really interesting, actually. You all touched on this, which is sort of that idea of individual resilience and maybe how the organization is functioning, maybe as an organism. And so Leo said something interesting in the comments here, which is measure what matters. So one of the areas I wanted to take the discussion is how do you take the temperature of at both the individual and the organizational level and measure resilience and see how it's manifesting?
I could probably start with just how to do that in a remote first environment. It's much more difficult. We all know that if you don't see your colleagues' legs, but also, Zoom calls may come across as somewhat repetitive, and asking, "How are you really today?" and not being satisfied by a superficial answer, and being always just very task oriented. So creating those caring circles, or how we call it at Brighter, so circles with people who may be onboarded with you, or maybe are coming from similar experiences, that you can reach out to and have almost like a mentoring coaching conversation about what's going on. Secondly, use of the engagement survey, but not as an A to Z solution. It is a good trigger to analyze the health and the benchmark where your organization is at, and then possibly focus on those difficult topics. Open up, create focus groups, engage with external consultants if need be. So I would start with that kind of tools, and creating those spaces, especially if you're hybrid or remote and you don't meet face to face too often.
Yeah, I also think you can also look at other types of HR measurements, right? So you can look at turnover data and slice that by your high potential employees or highest performing employees. You can look at how long are people staying in the organization before they decide to leave, and even look at your reason codes, right? Why are people saying why they're leaving, and does that match the reality on the ground? I think often we go through our exit surveys as just check the box and and come up with something to track in the system. But it's very important as being on the front lines of this information that as professionals we're really filtering it down, so that we can take actionable steps on the data. There are some other things you could look at, such as absenteeism. Are people taking their PTO throughout the year? Are there certain teams or functions or types of employee that are bucking the trend, so to speak? So if you really take that targeted approach, you can draw some conclusions. I think what you might find in some organizations, maybe not all, is that each team or function might have its own mini culture. And so if you really take a bird's eye view of the data, and then look at what the engagement scores are, and feedback is saying about that a particular leader or a particular group, you might find there to be some differences from the organization as a whole.
I love that, Joe. I love the individualization part, particularly because what we need, or bounce back is different for all of us. And so while these measurements can give us a good idea of what's happening, a pulse check, if you will, but always going back to that individualized aspect is always really key to me. Another measurement tool that I would offer up would be engagement in your wellness programs is really, I think, key. And also your employee resource groups. I think of it in terms of like that protective measure component. There's something powerful with being in affinity with other people like you. So if we think about resilience as connected to being the other and whatever the other means for you, to be in community with other people, particularly as you might be processing some structural challenges or systemic challenges that you're facing in your organization, can really be key in not only helping you bounce back, but to also be an active agent for change. Not that any organization should be expecting that of them, but should they choose to, they are at choice around it, right? So engagements in your employee resource groups, your wellness programs, I think can be key indicators in terms of like the circle of love that you're putting around your employees, so that way they're able to bounce back, not only on challenges faced in the organization, but also societal challenges. Because if we think about how are we really embodying and internalizing this idea of bring your whole self to work, or really recognizing that work and life oftentimes is life, quote unquote, personal life, whatever that means for you, is really blurred, right? And so being able to support them in all of it becomes key.
This is probably a good time. There's a really interesting comment here from Jen about, it looks like what we're looking at is supporting the whole person and the whole organization. And what happens when there's an acute situation, a crisis, whether it's an outage, a violent event that she mentions. I mean, anything can happen, right? And every organization has something different, but where the first priority is usually the response. But how can you also maybe in parallel prioritize helping people process at that time? How have you handled that? I mean, we've seen a lot of those, right? But how have you helped deal with that? Or should you even help? What should your priorities be in moments like that?
I'm happy to get us going. I think back to what happened in like 2001, right? With the racial conversations that our country was having. And also for some folks, it was a traumatic experience, right? Albeit not necessarily firsthand trauma, but seeing violence, seeing all of those things happening in the country, also COVID, all of these things are really connected, I think, for people. But to just focus on that, one of the things that we did, right, when George Floyd and other folks were killed, was to have a conversation, to set up a safe space conversation. Brave space is really what we called it, for folks to just name what's happening, what's going on for them. It wasn't an educational opportunity. It was you're feeling things possibly, right, as a human. What are those things for you? And we actually connected with our wellness team, who brought on a trained counselor to facilitate that dialogue in a healthy and safe way. So we had that. But we also recognize we're having these shared spaces, but group spaces based on affinity, based on identity, are also important, because what you're going to talk about and how you're going to talk about it is different, right? And when we think about resilience, as I said earlier, that individualization becomes key. And also choosing, are you going to be in a group space? Are you going to be in an individual space? Becomes important. So we had large groups, affinity space, and also offered up, reminded our colleagues that you get 10 free counseling sessions as being an employee of CSA Insurance Group. So you also have that individualized space for it. And we also were intentional in making sure that we had activities for community building, so that folks could be in community, in relationship with each other outside of the work that they're doing, and also outside of talking about what their emotions are, what they're feeling, but to just be with each other, right? So really having that holistic approach for folks to be at choice and having different things that work for them was really key in helping our colleagues. And I don't even want to say our colleagues, helping me also move through what I was processing and be at choice and be resilient around how I navigated the workspace and also my personal life as someone who is in the body and identities that I am in.
Tavi or Joe, how about you?
I agree with that. I think what's helpful in those types of situations is to speak to all five senses, right? Everyone processes information differently, and what might um, resonate with one person might not be received as well or as clearly with another person. And so the example that always comes, the most recent example that comes to mind for me, is COVID, and being in the thick of March of 2020 and what that looked like and how much uncertainty there was all around, right? Because there was a lack of information at the time and things kept unfolding. What I found to be successful in that particular moment was having all of the with having a diverse set of voices in the physical room, and making sure we were talking through, what were we seeing, what were we hearing, what were we feeling, being ambassadors for other groups in the organization, so that we left no stone unturned when it came to communications or action plans, to either implement protocols or shutdowns or whatever happened at the time. And constant communication, a forum to ask questions in a either a confidential or even anonymous way, so that you don't have that anxiety lingering out there. I think these are all important tools to maintain a two-way dialogue as much as you can with the rest of the organization.
I could probably add to all of what you've mentioned, the very recent crisis, and take it to, as an organization, as a global organization, often remote organization, you may end up dealing with certain geopolitical uncertainties, conflicts, and the most recent one in Ukraine also gave us a very big challenge to solve as leaders, especially supporting, in a most physical level, potential employees or their families in any possible way to escape the war zone, or to direct the funds, direct our efforts in the most useful way. So something we did at Brighter was to collect the intelligence on how can we support people in Ukraine, their families, their relatives, using either the donation and matching it as a second donation from a company. So we listen to the experts and our employees who are coming from the region and know the situation, would be our best experts. So it was really beautiful to see the collaboration and the bottom up response. How can we support the location that is remote, that is far away, with funds, with also ways of providing shelter to others. So I think all of the crises that we're living are global now, and coming to the law of how to basically support ourselves with resilience. Community support is often the best way to connect people, to bring the relevant information, and to maximize our efforts to support others who are in dire need of our action. So, and it's not over. So unfortunately, those crises are coming here and there. So we have to be strong and rely on each other.
One of you said earlier, which was really interesting, I always thought humans were naturally resilient. And I think we've been bombarded with things that will probably test even the most resilient of people. Do you feel that some people are more naturally resilient than others? And is resilience a skill that can be taught?
That's a good question. And it's a good question for me because there's a part of me that thinks about that it could be taught, but I don't really think about it as being taught per se, but there's things that you can do to strengthen your ability to bounce back. And those things aren't, I need to do this, I need to do that. It's more or less like how you operationalize your life, if you will, which are a choice around, but that's also privileged, right? Like what I have access to be able to support myself to bounce back is connected to a lot of other structural and systemic things that some individuals may or may not have access to. And what I need to be resilient isn't going to be the same for the next person. So even in that, just because they don't have the same access as I do doesn't take away from their ability to possibly even be more resilient than myself, right? But I think there needs to be that recognition in terms of access, and what that means in terms of your ability to bounce back, and also to even be in the situation where you may need to be bounced back, right? Like that's not absent or lacking connection to all of these other things, that we are a product of or always in engagement and in relationship to as people living in a society that often overvalues and undervalues certain people, certain identities, and also the socioeconomic implications that folks are born into or fall into, whatever the case may be. So, do I think resilience could be built in some ways? Yes, I also think it's connected to who you are, what you have access to. And I also think that folks don't need the same things to be resilient. And so, no matter what you're born into, a lot of folks can be much more resilient than those folks who have access, right? But I think over time, you can build that skill set. And a lot of it is really going back into yourself, doing that deep healing work, depending on what you're navigating. Um, and I guess the other part of your question is, I do think humans are resilient. I don't. That's not a question for me. It's really an exclamation mark. And resilience isn't you either are or you aren't. It's really a spectrum. And sometimes we might not have the capacity or be at full spectrum or full power. And sometimes we may be, and that's always changing, depending on what's happening in and around you.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I don't. I think we're past the point now where we should really talk about work life balance. I mean, it especially with remote work, although that doesn't apply to everybody, right? They're all different kinds of work situations. But I think what has come to the forefront, if anything, these past couple of years, is that you really can't divorce yourself from, at work, you can't really divorce yourself from what's going on at home. And if you're worried about, paying the bills, if you're worried about, your children, something that's going on, if you had a loss in your family, it's really hard, and I also would dare to say unfair to ask somebody to really separate themselves, completely separate themselves from it. Of course, focus is a skill that we all can develop and fine tune over time. But I think that the way that we should talk about this, these concepts should evolve more than just how do you leave your home life over there and then be fully engaged at work. I think we have to find a better way to meet people where they are.
I would also say we mostly live in a capitalist society where we're asked to do more and more and buy more and consume, and the expectation is always on the rise. We have to challenge this with our balance, obviously, coming back to the natural or like the machine parts. The machine cannot keep going without refueling, repairing, taking a rest, loading the battery. So is the plant. So without water, without nutrition, it's not gonna just grow. And if you look at the cycles, the seasons, leaves fall, flowers blossom, and it's a cycle. And I would wish we would see our life and our balance more as a cyclic view, also in our companies, in our organizations, that one cannot just keep going, work 70 hours per week. It's just not sustainable, because at some point that productive, that engaged person will just stop functioning, and will have a very, very big problem, challenge to get them back to where they were. So acting fast and setting this example as leaders is crucial here.
I just want to take a minute. We've got about another 20 minutes. So if anyone who's listening has questions or thoughts, things you want the panelists to cover, please put them into, you've done a great job, but continue putting them into the comments and I'll weave them in. I do have a question, which I think you guys have sort of hinted around the edges at, but I think we've covered the sort of resilience and the concern and the focus on the teams that you're charged with caring for in your organizations. But how, there's this question, who guards the guards, who cares for the carers, right? How do you, especially knowing that the audience here is very much your peers, how do you make sure that you are not burning out and your resilience is also refilled, if you will, considering what you've dealt with over the past 2.5, probably coming up on 3 years now, and just in general, when your focus is so much on watching out for others, what are some of the things that you can share to make sure that you yourself can give as much as you do?
Setting boundaries. That's a skill that I've developed over time in my career, and I don't mean that to be always telling people no, but sometimes not now is an okay answer, especially if if you're the person that's expected to deliver a certain result and you're just not, the energy is just not there, or your focus has to be somewhere else at the time. I think that to be successful, you have to learn strategies to communicate that in a way that others can understand and respect, so that you aren't perceived as a barrier in the organization, that you aren't perceived as not doing your job. But there's that, and then also creating a sense of self-awareness, right? So how am I feeling in the moment? Is this the right time for me to be engaging in this difficult conversation if I can avoid it? So sometimes when I'm faced with competing challenges, and there's just one more piling on in the day, one strategy that I like to use is hey, can we table this conversation for tomorrow, or happy to talk through this, happy to work with you on this. Give me, I need a little bit of space to think about that so we can have a productive conversation. So having your talking tracks handy, so that when you're in a stressful situation, you can go on a little bit of autopilot, and not stress yourself out even more, if that makes sense.
I love the autopilot metaphor, not only because I love the aviation and flight simulators, but we need that. So my similar approach to giving myself a bit of wiggle room or this autopilot is very, very regularly checking in with my peers. I do have a support system, some former managers, some former ex-colleagues, people from different locations who also challenge my ways of thinking, because maybe I don't have insights into all of the aspects of a situation. So never finding myself alone with a problem and not going through always the same problem, taking a stop and keeping track of all the little steps, habits that make my day closer to achieving little things, and not putting everything at the scale of, when I do this one big thing, something great will happen. That's a big thread for resilience. So putting a very grandiose aims, goals, and not having this regular check-in also with the community and with others. So that's something that really keeps me in health check with myself, and also be able to serve others in the best possible way. Something also that I recognize preventing burnout from that support that I'm giving as a leader is feeling that I want to connect with people, connect with the topic, connect with something that inspires me, as opposed to disconnecting with. So, for instance, planning time off, even very, very short one, before I really feel depleted and tired. So that's something I'm also taking care of, so that I'm never going through those big periods of time that I'm overworking myself and feel like I just can't take anymore. So that will be some of my practices here.
Those are really great practices from both of you. You know, I just reset it myself, if you will, in so many ways, not too long ago. And so what I would offer up is this idea of like resetting periodically. And in the resetting process, what comes up for me, or what I do, is to think about, what do I want to do? How do I want to show up? And what impact do I want to have? And in that, being really clear what's in scope and out of scope for me. And this sounds like a very mechanical thing. In scope, out of scope, it's really not that mechanical. It's a process of like going through the emotions and feeling it. So know that I'm talking about it in this mechanical way, but it ebbs and flows, and it's a very fluid thing, right? But really being clear around that has helped me, because in times of clutch, I know how I want to show up. I know what's important. I've named my values for myself, so I can always be a choice around, this is what, this decision is going to get me there. And I find that there's a lot of ease that comes along with it. And there's ease that come along with it because the conversations I've had to get there is thinking about, who do I want to be, right? As an individual, do I want to be the person who gets things done, or gets things done in a certain quality, right? And if that's important to me, recognizing that I might take a little bit more time, I might like all of these things, and what needs to happen for me to be clear around those things with the folks that I'm in community around. In that, it's really allowed me to have a ease around what I do and how I do it, and be able to communicate effectively. Now, as much as I've done that work, there's still things that come up, right? And so being religious around, what are those things that allow me to deal with stress a little bit more effectively, such as exercise and holding that space for myself, making sure that I schedule weekly check-ins, not one-on-ones where we're talking about the work, but check-ins in terms of, how are you, what's going on, how can I support you with my employees, has also really helped, because that's created a culture in which we're in touch and in community with each other, and don't necessarily engage each other from this transactional perspective of like, I need to get this done. No, yes, you need those things, and let's also create this space where we're seeing each other and being able to support each other. And so that could not have happened unless I was clear about who I want to be and how I want to show up. And that clarity is important because, as Katie said, we are in a capitalist society. We work in organizations where production is important, and no negative or positive value. It just is what it is. And so if that's important, how can you deliver in a way that is in alignment with your highest self and with the culture that the organization is trying to create, becomes important. And you can't really make informed decisions in stressful situations. So being clear around that and setting practices that enable that have become the ways that I ensure that I'm putting on my mask first as I support others bounce back.
It sounds like being very intentional and very disciplined is a common theme.
And focused.
Yeah. Has it been difficult at all to sort of, as you've had to make that shift or become more like that, have you gotten any pushback from other areas of the organization because so much more has been put on your shoulders over the past few years? How have you defended that space around yourself?
No, Katie, go ahead. I think you haven't gotten a chance to go first as I have, so please.
I think it's about giving a context. Whenever I felt, oh wow, this is overwhelming, this is too much, all of this cannot happen at the same time. So again, trying to be constructive, but letting, for instance, the leadership team know what happens if we don't do something, or what happens if we do something that will have an impact on the team, on the planning, on on the quality of the work. So always showing everything in a perspective really helped me. And I think this is how modern product teams are working, that are setting up certain roadmap, and what goes in there is absolutely crucial for the product development. And I think people teams should be working in the same way. Of course, unfortunately, in the past couple of years, we've been treated with really unpredictable crisis events. But this is again, if COVID, if war situation, if the racial crisis that happened with Black Lives Matter crisis happened, everything else is secondary, I suppose. So again, coming back to what Isaias mentioned about the values we're living in, and answering the question, what kind of leader do I want to be? How would I like to show up? Is something where a people leader can come back in such situations of reaching an overwhelming stage and just prioritizing. And I suppose if we're in a situation we don't know what to prioritize, these peer connections, this community really, really helps. And yeah, that would be my guess, I guess.
Yeah. Everything that Katie just said, I agree with and support. Um, I think what I would also add to what was just offered up and what I'm continuing to think about is it's important to really name what kind of organization you're in and how do you place value on who you are and the labor that you're engaging in, right? And how you produce. One, I'll name that for me, my work is important, right? Like my identity is connected to someone who does great work, right? That's important to me. So if I'm named that, then what I've come to realize is that me taking on more and more as is given to me validates a certain part of my identity, yet places me in a place where as more are coming up or things are happening, I'm not able to show up the ways that I want to, or I'm hurting myself, right? A part of myself in one way or another. And so naming how I put value in myself, who I am, what's important to me, has allowed me to really determine and name how certain things are connecting to it and how I'm making decisions, right? And so when I said earlier in terms of naming your values, all of those things, it's in those kinds of situations, it becomes important to me because then I can say, okay, Isaias, if you're valuing yourself and the work that you're doing by taking on more, then how is that connecting to what you just said as wanting to be someone not only who produces a lot, but does great quality work, right? So I've been able to navigate that by engaging in that process. And I often try to make space for others to be able to do that for them. Because what happens is you're just put in a better point to make an informed decision, right? And at the end of the day, you can't do that unless you're putting up the mirror. And when you put up the mirror, you're positioning yourself to make sure that you are also supporting in that circle of love that'll allow you to bounce back when moments of clutch or when stressful situations are very much going to occur.
I absolutely love what you just said, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper with that, if I may. For me, my part of my journey was also reassessing my values and the perceptions that I wanted others to have of me, and I struggled quite a bit with, you know, reacting to what I believed the perceptions would be or should be, right? And it goes back to your childhood, it goes back to your young adult life, right? And thinking about some of the effects of some of those expectations that may or may not have even existed. And so that was something that I wrestled quite a bit with over time and came to a better place when I grounded myself in reality, grounded myself in hey, here's where things didn't go so well with my own resilience. And what steps could I have taken, and where could I have influenced things a little bit differently. What helped me overcome that is uh, thinking about why I'm doing this work in the first place, right? What am what are my talents? What do I bring to the table naturally? And what comes, harder? And so, being able to be aware of that and, realize where I can add value right away and where, things might take a little bit more time, has helped me set expectations within my own head, right? And then externally, as I'm interacting with others, I've found that adapting my own communication style to a way that resonates with that person's own style has helped, and that's hard. We, especially when you don't interact with the C suite, for example, some more than others, right? Eh, but being able to draw some conclusions about you know how might they interpret what I'm saying, how might they, how can I say things in a way that will help them connect those dots, has really helped me create a better sense of purpose, and better perceptions in the organization.
So we have 5 minutes left, and what I'd love to actually is ask you two final questions. I think you're a very aligned panel. I've had moderated some panels for Hacking HR where everybody brings it. I'm not saying you don't all have great perceptions, but they're very aligned perspectives, which is really interesting. I feel like you could all go out for a drink and probably talk for 12 hours. But I'd love to ask if each of you has kind of learned something or a perspective or something that you maybe hadn't thought about before just from each other. And if not, it's just sort of a question. Did you kind of come away going, I hadn't thought about that?
I did thought about that, but I really benefited from connecting the topic again to the value aspect. I think that's something that is very hard to compromise on as human beings. And I think this year, this century, we are glad that our organizations are evolving to more modern places where we can bring the whole self to work. But I still think not everyone is as privileged to do so. And we as people leaders should be on the lookout of what is this privilege? How can we detect those who cannot? Maybe that's also outside of our industries, where people maybe cannot work remotely, or they don't have accesses to the types of jobs we are offering. So there is a big aspect of building upon the community, sharing our privilege if we have any, and reaching out to each other. So I feel like each and every one of us in a leadership position has almost an obligation to help others who are growing, who are not yet in that great place, but at the same time, always having our values in check. So thank you, Isaias, Joe, for bringing this up. I learned.
How about you, Joe?
I think this could be a springboard for a whole other interesting discussion, about human needs, right? And meeting people where they're at. I think Sias, you really brought up a great point about the privilege and others having different kinds of challenges and circumstances that might not allow them to thrive as well as others. And so I think that's a challenge that as leaders we're going to have to work through in order to be successful, and that's going to run a little bit counterintuitive to what we might have been taught in quote HR school. Maintaining that clear line of distinction. So thank you for bringing that to the forefront.
Thank you both. I really appreciated being in community around this conversation with all three of you, really, but particularly two of you. And one of the things that I appreciated, I was like, I didn't know we were going to go there, but we did. Thank you, Katie and Joe, around this idea of naming that we're in a capitalist society, right? Like even naming it can be difficult for folks. that contextualizing resiliency in a society where production over and over is important, and how that yields detachment from yourself and from others, and connecting with yourself being that really important point, was really just a wonderful point. And I appreciated Katie bringing up the capitalist, naming the capitalist element to it, and Joe sharing vulnerably and courageously around like the work that you're doing, right? And I think oftentimes us being perceived as resilient is to not name the struggles we're having and to not name, right, how we're working through it, because you're resilient if you're not even talking about it. The perception's there, and us dismantling that, us reimagining that, is really important. And in the ways that we just demonstrated and even put verbiage to our context is really the way forward. And so I appreciated those elements of our conversation.
So I want to thank all of you for coming and everybody for coming to listen. And Enrique, thank you so much for continuing to put these together.
Thank you so much, everybody. Tisa, we can hear you now. The storm has started. I hope you stay safe, and power doesn't go out or anything. So, Tisa, thank you so much for leading this conversation. Joe, Sayas, Kathy, thank you so much for being here, and everybody who is tuning in. Thank you so much. We are getting into the last panel of the day, which is going to be architecting corporate culture for wellness, well-being, and mental health. And we're going to be kicking off this panel in the next 2 or 3 minutes. So stay tuned. We are going to be getting back to the last panel of the day in 2 or 3 minutes. So thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe and see you soon. And see you all the participants in 2 minutes.